For Nest, we've been really fortunate. Auto enrolment has been really great for the UK, and that means that we do now have many millions of members. But as you said, it's not the member that chooses to join Nest, it's their employer. So we have to work really hard to think about how do we overcome what might feel like an arm's length relationship.
Welcome to the Digital Customer Comms podcast, where we discover how leading regulated companies engage, retain, and delight customers at scale. In this episode, we're taking a closer look at the unique challenges of communicating with pension scheme members, especially when members haven't always signed up for themselves, which is the case with auto-enrolment. We're lucky to have with us Deborah Perkins, Director of Propositions at Nest Pensions, the auto-enrolment pension provider for the UK, who serve over 13 million members through to retirement. Hi, Deb.
Hi, Sam. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today, for coming on and chatting with me. I know we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about Nest's experience with digital platforms, the real world impact of your app, and just generally kind of how you engage members for the long haul. So let's start with a little bit of context. What sets pensions and other long-term products apart when it comes to comms? And are there any sort of particular challenges that come with that?
Yeah, there's a lot, and you kind of nail it in the term long term. At the end of the day, you're potentially trying to build vibrant and engaging relationships with people over potentially a great many years. It's feasible for you to have someone join you in their first job as a teenager, right through to making decisions about their retirement. And so trying to think about how you're relevant and timely and vibrant in your communications all the way through. And as you said, for Nest, we've been really fortunate. Auto enrolment has been really great for the UK, and that means that we do now have many millions of members. But as you said, they are at arm's length. It's not the member that chooses to join Nest, it's their employer. So we have to work really hard to think about how do we overcome what might feel like an arm's length relationship for a company that you've not chosen. And then, there's the added complexity that it is a low engagement category, pensions. There's it's getting better, but that's traditionally how it's always been. So you'll find that potentially outside of the annual benefit statement, many members just won't look frequently at their pensions. It's not like a current account where people look at it more. Plus as well, the other part of the unique challenges for Nest, or kind of unique challenges, is we do cater for low to moderate earners, and they can very often feel excluded from mainstream finance, and they won't have the benefits necessarily, for example, of access to paid advice. So again, we have to try and fill some of those gaps for people, help them feel more included from that. And then think about it, like if we do have somebody for that amount of time, how many times are they going to change employer, change address, all of those things over a long term, trying to get really good quality data, and so that you can have a good and personalized conversation with someone in the moments that matter, can be really tricky over the long term.
So when we talk about them being at an arm's length, we're really talking about a very broad audience, which is very difficult in itself, even if you had ideal data about age, demographics, as well as what these people do for employment, all of that sort of stuff, to be able to go, okay, well, it seems that these low earners, perhaps we might need to communicate with them more often than high earners. You haven't got that option in a lot of cases where you don't have good data. So when we talk about something like that, an example of frequency, how often do you communicate with someone? It could be as long as a piece of string if it's a long-term product. It could be the annual benefit statement. And okay, people don't want to engage with their pension every day like a current account. Or it could be the case where, right, we really need to educate people about their pension to get them more engaged. What's your approach?
Yeah, and I think when you think about frequency of comms, we've all had that horrible experience, haven't we, of being spammed. And that's definitely not the business for Nest in any shape or form. And I think like a lot of organisations, we will think about it in terms of, if you like, a hierarchy of communication. So obviously regulatory has to go first, and we have to find the right ways to find our members to make sure that they have access to that. And then, ensuring we have really good, what we would call operational communication. So they know exactly where they are in their journey with us, how to get things done, etc. But aside from that, when we know that we can see someone's in a particular stage of the journey and they would benefit from a little bit of extra knowledge or an extra nudge on something, such as making a nominated beneficiary, for example, we take a bit of a test and learn approach. So we're very fortunate at Nest that we do have some really great behavioural scientists that help us with our communications and try and help us work out when is the best time to communicate someone about something? What's the best type of communication? What channel works best for people? And it's really that continual kind of test and learn and being really curious about our customers that helps us to hone our approach to frequency outside of, as I say, the standard kind of regulatory and operational communications that we do.
So that's quite a good example, the nominated beneficiary, of a situation where I don't know exactly what data you get from an employer, but you might have sort of current email address and address for the time when they were employed with that employer, not necessarily updated live, but they wouldn't have given a nominated beneficiary necessarily along with their employer's information. That's something that they need to provide themselves. So something like that, you're sort of chasing people for their data, and that can be, like you say, it can feel spammy. So are there ways that you found that have been successful to get around that?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So two things there really. Data quality in our industry is, it's not just us. It's an industry-wide problem, but one that we're really pleased to see that there are projects such as the Pension Dashboard Project and the Pension Data Quality Project that are helping for us to get better with this. And again, it's that whole challenge of people can have many pensions over the course of their life, have worked for many different companies, moved house so many times. But the first point on that is because it does come from employers, for us, it can be wrong from the outset. A simple spelling error can mean that we have to watch really carefully for duplicate accounts. So somebody can have a Nest pension with us because they've changed employer 3 or 4 times in their life. So we have to spot where potentially things haven't come to us in quite the right way. It's really nice that, very often companies will ask now for someone's preferred name or their nickname. But again, it's understanding that if we have that, anytime we come to like crucial moments that matter, such as potentially no one wants to go through a bereavement journey. If your family then have to deal with the fact that we don't have your legal name, it can make things so much more difficult. And then you have the complexity of if an employer gives us somebody's work email address. Well, I live in a world where that's fine because I live on my work email. But for so many industries, that's just not the case. So many sectors, people might not even know they have access to a work email address, let alone use it. So it then means that we, again, are just breaking the ability to communicate really important things. So if it's wrong from the start, it's really tricky for us.
And that's just at the basic level where you're wanting to keep people updated about the operational regulatory side of things. But you've also got marketing and engagement and education and content and insights. In terms of that stuff, we often think about segmenting an audience into types or categories. If you don't even have the basic data that you need, are you able to do any of that at all, that segmentation, to communicate with different members in different ways, or has that been a challenge as well?
Yeah, and it is a challenge. As I say, I feel very fortunate. We are fortunate to have some really clever data analysts at Nest, and they've really helped us understand from the data that we do have, what is the relationship that our members have with us, i.e., we can tell what life stage they are, and we can tell how they're interacting with us when they've stopped interacting with us from that perspective. But we do, like many companies, use some additional third-party segmentation to help us understand really important things like financial vulnerability, attitudes to money, all of those things that really help us then start to drive a more segmented and more personalised approach, so that actually, there's not an assumption that if you're onboarding with us, that therefore you must be a young person with no family responsibilities. It's just not true. So it's really important for us to make sure that, as I say, in the moments that matter, we are applying, even with imperfect data, as much wisdom as we can to the way that we test and the way that we apply some of our communications.
And with digital tech, obviously, you've got more of your own data. And perhaps, in the past where we would have primarily looked to segment by demographics or, age, something like that, people are more and more looking at their own first-party data platforms to see where people are within the journey that they've laid out for their customers. Is that what you found useful? And do things like your new app that you introduced last year help with that?
Yeah, it absolutely is, because we'll all have different preferences where and how we want to be communicated to, and different things that work. So yes, you're absolutely right. We will try and work out where are people naturally and where are they naturally more comfortable being communicated with. And yes, we found really interesting insights from our new app and our first ever app. It's still in its first iteration, but it's a relatively basic at the moment. But my goodness, the insights that we've already got, we didn't advertise it, but we've already had hundreds of thousands of members log in and use it. And it's really interesting to see some of the differences between how people have perhaps interacted with us over the phone or on our portal versus our app. Earlier on, you mentioned nominated beneficiaries, for example. Such a crucial part of the pension journey that we work very, very proactively across a range of channels to try and encourage people to make sure they've got an expression of wish or nominated beneficiary in place. What's been really interesting for us on the app is we can see that people are far more likely, as soon as they log in, to go in and do that, which has been really interesting. And we're also noticing that new members at the point of onboarding, again, are far more likely to use the app rather than the portal. So again, we're starting to learn that actually if you want to communicate to new members, maybe that is the better way to start to do it, rather than traditionally thinking about them logging in and always using our portal, for example, or contacting us over the phone. So yes, it's been a really important addition to our communication suite.
And what prompted that initially? Was it the need for more data primarily? Was it the need to keep up with people's behaviour in terms of how much they use their mobiles?
All of that, I think. I think Nest has been fortunate. It was born digital first and has always been a digital first scheme. So it was a very natural development for us to do that. And recognition that you can see that it's very easy in all of our lives. We can see more and more is moving over to applications. And for us, it was about potentially being able to explore things like being able to do much more timely nudges. I know what I'm like for sure, so I am very good at ignoring a lot of things that come my way. But if I see an app notification, it takes seconds to take a look at it, doesn't it? And again, it's just something you want to explore, to say, are there parts of our member base that would prefer to be communicated to by us in that way? And so it was a really, really important part of our suite, and one that we'll continue to iterate as we learn more for what works for our members.
That communicating with the right people at the right time according to their choice is so big now, especially post Consumer Duty. Is that something that you're able to do better with the app in terms of collecting the right data on where people will engage and where they want their communications?
Yeah, I think it is. As I say, for us, it's all about really, it'd be very easy to have that one size fits all approach, wouldn't it? But we know that that's going to be less effective than if we can, as you say, find the moments that matter and try and personalize there. So again, absolutely all the time trying to think about testing different vehicles, including the app. We've talked about, we've tested how can we insert video, for example, into journeys to bring things to life. It could be a whole separate session, couldn't it? But where we talk about how can we use AI and machine learning to start to get better in some of the things we do, whether it's really simple things like we think about inclusivity a lot with the nature of our base, and how can AI, for example, help more people feel more included, if you like. We also think about how can it help people understand what their future selves might be like. So I think it's all the time trying to think about how do we iterate our channels and our communication types to start to make sure that we're staying relevant all the time.
For a lot of different types of users. And when you mention, vulnerable people, rolling out projects like a new app, for example, and thinking about engagement and results, you have to put together some metrics that tell you that has this been successful? How are we successfully engaging our members? Those can sometimes be skewed towards the average rather than including the people who are often excluded, the vulnerable and the elderly, etc. How do you balance sort of quantitative and qualitative data in being able to analyze your journeys and see success and evaluate it for the future?
Yeah, I think for us, it starts before we deploy. So we are very fortunate. We do have a rich sources of insight that we use. So although I'm relatively new to Nest, we talk all the time about when we're creating new products, new propositions, what are the principles that we want to set for them that acknowledge the uniqueness that comes with Nest's space. And so there are things that we will need to cater for that perhaps some of our peers don't, or it's not necessarily in their mission. So whenever we're creating a new product or service, we will talk about what are the principles that we want to apply to make sure that this does feel like something that is inclusive. And then when it comes to metrics, again, we will always set a hypothesis. So if we're testing a piece of communication, for example, we will set some hypothesis right at the start to say, what are we hoping? What do we suspect this activity is going to drive in terms of member behaviour? So then starting to really think about then how we then measure against those, and did our hypothesis come true, or if we found something surprising, good or bad, or not good or bad, I suppose more, has it been less or more successful than we were hoping it to be? And so, yeah, it just becomes really important for us to track and test and learn as we go, as we compare how each of our audiences behave versus a control. The app is a really good example, as I say, is are we seeing people completing some transactions there versus the portal, and then trying to determine, what was it about that we did that resonated better, for example.
It would be so easy for you to just relay one metric for all, just as much as it would be easy for you to communicate the same thing to the whole audience, as in, oh, right, we're looking at engagement rates across our audience, and that's what we're optimizing our entire communication stack towards. It would be very easy for you to communicate internally. You need a lot of buy-in for change when you're doing something that's project based and that's looking at lots of different metrics and evaluating quant and qual data. And can you talk a little bit to the culture internally of buy-in for risk, the attitude to risk, and how, we typically talk about compliance being a blocker traditionally in financial services, and how actually it can be an enabler if you've got a great team.
Yeah, you're so right. Again, I'm very fortunate. I feel very fortunate to have the role that I have in the organisation that I have. I think that we have a really well balanced attitude towards risk. We serve such an important role in UK society with what we provide with auto enrolment, and we believe we serve the underserved in terms of low to moderate earners. So we do have to take really good care. That doesn't mean that we are super locked down. We will take no risks whatsoever, because actually that's not what risk is about. Risk is about saying, how do you do something in the right way? And so I feel very fortunate that we do have a really great way of working through that at Nest that does allow us to try and find ways to communicate in the right way at the right time, and to use the right language from that perspective as well.
So that kind of leads me into talking about, I always say this now, we can't not talk about AI. You mentioned it earlier in terms of risk. Regulated industries, pensions specifically, there's a lot of fear mongering. There is a lot of risk, genuine risk around AI. In terms of the future and tech trends and digital communications, what are you looking at Nest, and what does the next sort of few years hold for you? Are there some AI projects on the horizon?
I think that, where this industry is as a whole with communication, I think there's still so much to do on some of the basics. We still are a low engagement category. We're still lots more to do, as I say, just even some of the basics of engagement in some more traditional journeys as well. But I think it would be really crazy not to seek some of the advantages, whilst acknowledging that the last thing that Nest could do would be to introduce anything that might be deemed fake or misleading. That's just not anything that we would go anywhere near. So I think there's lots to do with some of the basics, but there's also things that we do want to explore, as I say, if it can help us with thinking about inclusivity a bit more, helping making sure our language is working for people. Yeah, I think there's lots to do. But there's also, as I say, a ton really still for us to do with more of the basics as well. As I say, our app is in its infancy, and we know that there'll be a lot more we can do to get that as optimized as possible as well.
So we have to let you go soon, but in terms of the basics, do you have any advice? We have a lot of advisors like IFAs, as well as people at providers that listen to this podcast. Do you have any advice for getting the basics right?
I don't think I have any groundbreaking words of wisdom, but I will always say, start by starting, I guess. Try and test and learn. It's such a great way to, just be, if you're worried, if you're thinking about risk, if you're worried about cost, test and learn can be a great way to find what really works before you commit to scaling. And wherever you can, personalize. Even if it's the illusion of personalization, it's still better than one size fits all, I think, are the two things that I would say. It's really about knowing your customer base and being hungry with that customer curiosity and finding ways to use that to make sure that you're really, really cracking the moments that matter in as personalized way as possible.
That's a great answer. So you're saying these are the 3 steps and then you're done, you're finished and you can retire on a boat somewhere.
I wish. No, it will be ceaseless. As you said, we've got at Nest many millions of members, and so trying to get a diverse, vibrant, engaged relationship with them is incredibly complex. So I think it'll be a while before we're done.
There's always a next project. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for chatting with me. I'm sure we'll speak to you again soon. Deb Perkins, thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much, Sam. Been a pleasure. Thank you.